Welcome back to another episode with ByrdAdatto. Today we have a pretty special one, a different kind of video than we typically shot. A lot of our videos, we obviously have the person with us. But this particular video, there's a lot of anxiety out there, obviously, with COVID-19. And it's not just your personal health and your business. A lot of people are wondering about their own personal finances. And we thought that for the next 3 weeks, we would have one individual just to start talking about some tips that you can start thinking of to start taking your care of your own personal finances during COVID-19. And so this week is our first of a 3-part series. And maybe Michael, you can help introduce who our special guest is and how different this particular event is compared to normal videos.
Yeah, I mean, this is probably more webinar style than our normal videos. So if you have the time to watch the video and spend a little extra time learning about the finances, we would encourage you to do so. David Mandell is our guest. He's with OJM Group, someone that we have worked with over the years, spoken at conferences together. And a couple things about Dave that has really jumped out and impressed us and made us comfortable to refer him to our clients. Number one is that he is an MBA and a JD. And so he has ethical standards as an attorney that he has to uphold that puts him in a different fiduciary role than a lot of financial advisors. And number two, and perhaps most importantly, his firm has the same philosophy as it relates to education and training, and they invest a lot in writing and speaking to provide education to the masses about their subject matter expertise. And so we're excited that Dave agreed to come, and with that, here's Dave with his first of 3 episodes.
Thanks, guys, for that introduction. I appreciate it, as you guys know, and I enjoy doing presentations for anything related to ByrdAdatto, and love speaking with you guys on panels together, as we've done many times, or coming to the offices in Dallas and working with your group, or you guys coming to meet our people. We've got a great relationships with you folks. So as the guy said, this is a short piece of a WebEx that I've done on actions to take now financially during the COVID crisis. And there's 6 actions I'm going to cover. We're going to do this in 3 different installments. So today we're going to, part 1, we're going to take on the first 2. Okay. So obviously there's a lot of stress out there in terms of what's going on as I record this in the beginning of April, and you may be watching it later. Imagine that this COVID-19 crisis is not going away anytime soon from either a health point of view or a social point of view or a financial point of view. So the number 1 action you can take or should take in this crisis as we make our way through it is to be in contact with your financial quarterback. Now, at OJM Group, we use that term, and that's the role we play with our clients. And this is a sports term, quarterback, coming from the football, sport of football, and it's basically the person who's sort of in charge and has a knowledge of everything that's going on, at least on the offense. So that's sort of a term of art we use. And the reason this is important is you don't really want to be going it alone when it comes to financial decisions. It causes more stress and may actually lead to bad decisions. Now, some of you may say, well, I don't have a financial quarterback. And when we get to part 3, one of the lessons, one of the last 2 actions to take is if you don't have one, to try to find one, or you're not happy with who you're working with, what to be asking, what to look for, important questions. So that's coming in the future. But anyway, for today, be in contact with your financial quarterback. And not only should that financial quarterback be sort of an expert in their field and have the knowledge, let's say a physician has the knowledge of orthopedics, if that's their field, but they also should be really strong in terms of the bedside manner. And that's really the partner in planning aspect, the psychological aspect, the sounding board, meaning when the markets are tanking, and we're speaking to our clients, we manage at OJM Group a little under $500 million for our clients, mostly physicians and business owners, mostly physicians and then business owners across the country. And we're in touch with them, one, to talk about sort of our technical expertise, but more it's just to check in with them. How are they doing? What's stressing them out? Are they thinking of, hey, maybe I should be selling or going to cash or, getting more defensive? Listening to them and then coming back to them with some data, with some sort of logical, unemotional approaches. And that's the role of the advisor today. The roles of advisors throughout, bull markets and in sort of, normal times, we don't have to do as much of that. I mean, we still have communication with our clients, but it's not as often as what we're doing now with triage. And we need to be good listeners. You want an advisor who's not emotional, is more disciplined, data-driven. And I use this example because my background is a lawyer, like, Michael and Brad and his firm. My background, I practiced law for 12 years before I started our financial firm about 12 years ago. And there's a saying that is credited to Abraham Lincoln 150 years ago: an attorney who represents himself has a fool as a client. And what that means is, you may know the law and be able to, from a technical point of view, represent yourself if you get into a dispute, but you're probably too emotional. You're in the weeds. You can't see the forest for the trees. You won't make good decisions. Things will upset you. You won't be willing to make a reasonable settlement or negotiate because it's about your money or about your reputation, and you get too personally involved. So Abraham Lincoln realized this, a couple 100 years ago, almost, and that's why very few attorneys will do that. Same thing in medicine. Physicians really shouldn't be treating themselves. If it's something minor, of course, not a big deal, but when it gets into a real medical issue, most doctors should, even if it's in their field, should be going to another physician. Well, you apply that to the financial world, and this is why having that financial quarterback is so valuable. Now, we've got a number of books you're going to be able to get for free, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But in one of our books called Wealth Management Made Simple, we spend a whole chapter about investing on your own, and we're not against that. Some of our clients, we manage most of their money. They're still managing a piece of it. But there's certainly data out there, and there's one study I refer to here, but there's a number of them in our book that sort of quantify the value of advisors. And one of the things is behavioral. So one of the elements, in addition to making better decisions in terms of investments or having access to non-traded or alternatives that a lot of late investors can't do, or better in terms of tax harvesting and tax management, or better in terms of asset location, or better in terms of financial modeling. There's a lot of things that advisors typically value they can bring to the table, but one of those is on the behavior, which is what we're worried about clients today. And without professional guidance, what happens, and I'll show this in a couple more slides, you might succumb to fear. And this is much different than a couple of months ago when we were at all-time highs, when we had clients who in 2019 were succumbing potentially to greed. Hey, Dave, why does my portfolio have any bonds in it? The S&P is up 30%. It'll never go down. There's very little volatility in 2019. Why should I just have more and more and more in equity markets? Why do I need anything in alternatives? Well, the answer to that was March and now April, right? That's the reason we had balanced portfolios, not 100% in equities, depending on different models. I mean, clients who are longer term might be 80-20. 70-30, and then on their way down. But that was the greed on the way up, and now there's fear on the way down, which is sell everything. Our reflexive brain takes over. Very interesting piece of our newest book for doctors called Wealth Planning for the Modern Physician. There's a section on investments of how physicians are different and how they're the same to typical investors. And the way we're all the same was we all have the same brain. And our reflexive brain, our hindbrain, kicks in when there's fear. And it's very hard to overcome that with our reflective, rational brain. And there's a lot of data on that. In fact, there's one study that's not so much on reflexive brain, but it's on making poor decisions. And another problem today, which is how much news, how much information we get. And this is a very interesting study, which is in the field of neuroeconomics, which is studying how our brain works when we make investment decisions. And this study is in our new book for physicians, and it goes back to the 1980s at MIT. I was in Cambridge in the 1980s going to Harvard. So some of my probably contemporaries. So they had two groups of investors, and one group had just the financial information. They gave them a certain amount of money to invest. The other group was given the financial information, like the 10K or the annual report, but they were also given access to the financial news. Now, the financial news in the 1980s was some staid program like once a week, or once a day, Wall Street Review or something like this. Not today's CNBC with bells and whistles and screaming and mad money in your face and ringing a cowbell and all of that. So very different financial news, much less ubiquitous, much less sensationalist. But still, even then, 30 years ago in the late 80s, 35 years ago, it was very clear what happened. The investor group who did not have access to the news did not trade as much and outperformed the group that had access to the news. The group that had access to the news traded more. They thought they saw different patterns, they could trade on the news, et cetera. More turnover, poor performance. And I worry about that for clients who don't have good financial quarterbacks, or don't have any at all, who are tuned into CNBC or the news constantly, and they're trying to time the market. And we'll show how that is such a poor idea. So one of the things that your financial quarterback should be doing is kind of taking a macro look, or giving you some macro points long-term. And action number 2, we'll talk about micro long-term. But macro long-term is looking at the long-term stock market. This is 120 years, right? And what you'll see, if you look at this just quickly, what comes off of this? It's basically a pattern going up with some blips, with some downturns. I mean, look at 08, 09, the global financial crisis. It doesn't look that scary on this chart. Although those of us who were investing for clients at that point, like our firm, and those of you listening to this, watching this, who had money investments or had any kind of financial life, it was scary because we didn't know what was going to happen. It was unprecedented. 100, 200-year-old firms like Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns, wiped out, and worried about the solvency of the banks, et cetera. Merrill Lynch having to be acquired by Bay of A, or they would have gone under. So lots of scary times there, but it doesn't look so bad. Okay, even the Great Depression. Okay, even the Great Depression, which is the most significant downturn. The Great Depression went on officially for 10 years, and it dropped precipitously in the crash of 1929. But you can see by 1936, which is still within the Great Depression, a lot of that in the stock market had been made up, right? It came crashing down in 29, but by 36, looks like just from the chart, 2/3 to 3/4 of that downturn had been made up. Then there was a decline again, and then World War II, and then it was basically straight up for 30 years. Also interesting was in World War I, which you can see, and the last analogous crisis we've had to today, which was the flu epidemic, which killed 1 million people, millions worldwide, if I read, if I'm remembering it properly. After that was the Roaring 20s, straight up for basically 10 years. So I think when you look at this, it doesn't mean I know what's going to happen with the stock market. Doesn't mean I know what's going to happen with the economy. It doesn't mean that we're not in for pain. It just means if you look at it long term, not a year, not 2 years, not 5, not 10, not 30, 100+ years, you see a pattern. And that pattern is when we have crises, we come back from. Okay, and it usually doesn't take that long. So hopefully this is the kind of information you're getting from financial quarterback to make you start to bring the cortisol levels and stress levels down. Then you can make proper decisions. And in part 2, I'm going to talk about tactical things you might be doing with your portfolio. It doesn't mean you don't do anything, but it certainly means we don't act out of fear. Because here's the problem, right? I have 2 slides. There's going to be illustrations. Greed